Okay, good evening everyone, and a big welcome to Pennine Ham's regular meeting, and a big welcome to viewers on YouTube and those who watch this video afterwards. Really pleased to welcome our speaker tonight, who is a very good friend of our club here in Pennine Ham, Anthony, K8ZT. Delighted that we were able to get Anthony to come back to talk about a subject, and he'll talk about it himself, that causes different views amongst radio amateurs. Contesting is a bit like FT8. There are some people that absolutely love radio contests, and there are some people who hate them. And in the same way, we have the same experience with FT8. But there's a bit more to it than that. And Anthony gave a talk in the US at the Contest University on this subject. And I kind of thought it would be good for him to just talk to us as a club and to our members and our friends who watch our videos about what more we can get out of contesting than simply giving 599 reports to other stations. So Anthony, over to you.
Well, good evening, everyone. And you'll notice I am wearing my Contest University instructor shirt, so I'm officially in that mode to this evening. And I'm going to talk about introduction to contesting from both the idea of competitive and non-competitive contesting. First of all, when a lot of us think of contesting, we think of big stations like K3LR, which is about 50 miles due east of me. It's Tim Duffy, the owner of the station, and they've won numerous first places in all the major contests. But this isn't what most contesters look like, and we're going to focus on that end of contesting today. But as usual, my presentation is full of links, and you'll want to be able to access these links by going to the slideshow itself at tiny.cc/AR contest, or you can shoot the QR code. I'll also have this available at the end of the slideshow. My contact information, K8ZT73@gmail.com, and my website, K8ZT.com. So, what is amateur radio contesting? Also known as radio sport, it's a competitive activity pursued by amateur radio operators. Winning is typically based on the highest total score in a given time period. Where did contesting come from? Well, originally the ARRL had held something called the Intercontinental Amateur Radio Communications Competitions in the 1920s. And you can see this was at sort of the beginnings of amateur radio, because a number of the stations were using Spark, a number were using CW, no one was using phone at that time. And you can see that there were a number of stations that were successful at making transatlantic contacts. So this became sort of a popular idea of seeing how many stations you could contact transatlantically. So it became popular to start these types of contests. Contests were also formed to provide opportunities for amateur radio operators to practice their message handling skills. This was used for routine or long distance emergency communications, but we forget early 1920s amateur radio often involved relaying a message to another station, because stations were not necessarily capable of contacting long distances. So the whole idea of being accurate and efficient at copying and then retransmitting a message is the whole idea of where our exchange in contesting comes from. Over time, the number and variety of contests greatly increased. Each has its own specific rules, dates, frequencies, and character. Today, many operators pursue the sport as their primary radio amateur activity. Contesting is popular activity in amateur radio, but just like amateur radio itself, it is a multifaceted activity with different meanings and activities for individual operators. We're going to focus first on competitive versus non-competitive contesting. So what is competitive contesting? That's when you're trying to win your category, place high in the scores, exceed your personal previous best, meet personal goals, best score within your group, radio club, circle of friends. The whole idea is you're trying to get the best possible score. And not everyone can win the contest, but you can finish in the top 10. For many years, my wife would come into the station during a contest and ask, "How are you doing?" And I'd say, "I'm in the yellow box." And when I said I was in the yellow box, what was I referring to? Well, CQ magazine used to have the top 10 for each category in the yellow box when they printed the results. So she knew that I was doing pretty well because I was pretty confident I was going to be in the top 10. I wasn't sure I was going to win. It's almost impossible to ever know whether you're going to win, but I knew I was going to have a good score. Non-competitive contesting, on the other hand, winning is not the goal. There's a lot of other goals, but winning is not the goal. It might be increasing your number of DXCC countries. It might be earning an award, worked all states, worked all continents, U.S. counties, etc. It might also mean testing stations, antennas, equipment, trying out new bands and new modes. One of the things about contesting, whether it's competitive or non-competitive, is there's a large number of potential stations to contact. So if you want to test your station or your antennas, a contest is a good time to do it, and you don't need to be competitive. Non-competitive contesting is also a great way to train people for emergency operators, train them as new hams, improve message handling skills, and if they're learning something new, such as CW, build their speed and their accuracy. But probably most non-competitive contesters just enjoy the fun working a lot of stations in a short time. And this is my friend Jim, K8ZT, and he loves to work contests that he loves to call CQ, even though he's not worried so much about the competitiveness. He wants to work a lot of stations. Why are contests a great place for working more QSOs in rare locations? Well, there's higher activity level with a higher density of stations on multiple bands. Some locations are only on during contests. There's some contesting stations in the Caribbean, for example, that are not active except for during contest. Some of the best stations with the best operators and receiving antennas are listening, so even your weak signals will get worked. In the 160 contest with my 5 watts and a 43-foot vertical, I know my station is not easy to hear, but I know certain stations around the U.S. will hear me, like Tony N0NI in Iowa has beverage antennas that go out as soon as the corn is harvested, and he can easily pick up my signal. It also allows you to hone your copying skills with unfamiliar call signs, power-ups, weak stations, etc. It's a chance to work new entities, grids, squares, grids, states, counties, countries, etc. The other thing is other stations want to work you. So I always tell people if you get on the air and call CQ and no one answers, that's because you don't have any friends. But if you get on during a contest, even if you don't have any friends, you have people that want to get points, so they'll work you anyway, even if they're not your friends. So just remember during contests, they have a highly incentivized reason for working you because of what's points for them. So don't worry if it's not points for you. It just means that you'll get a response. Other hams appreciate the contacts you provide, especially if you're a multiplier. I try and always get on when I'm a special multiplier in a contest. For example, the Ohio QSO party, I'm always on because I want people to be able to work my Ohio county. So that's one of the reasons to get on, even if you're not worried about your final score. But before you jump in, make sure you know your exchange, and I have a whole document, as I said earlier. When you click on these links, it'll take you out. This is information on finding grid squares, what type of exchanges, things such as name, serial number, age, the year first licensed, SPC, which stands for state, province, or country, AWR and RAC sections, counties, grid squares, CQ zones, ITU zones. You can find all this information from this document. So that is very helpful, so you know the exchange. Here's just some more of that same list. So whether it's competitive or non-competitive, amateur radio contesting is different than most other sports competitions. In radio sport, contestants get to choose their own playing field. They can choose to operate phone, CW, digital, or all the modes based on what they're interested. They can choose bands that they're interested in operating on that they have equipment and antennas for, and they can choose the level of competitiveness, whether it's making a half a dozen contacts or 1,000 contacts. That's solely up to you. No one will worry if you don't. It's not like playing professional sports where you have to make a certain performance to be considered successful. You can also choose contests based on things that favor you, such as your geographic location, specific bands increasing your DXC worked all states totals, winning or finishing in a top spot. If you want to win your first contest, a lot of times a good place to start is find a small contest that's less competitive and your chances of winning go up. In a sporting event, in the olden days, you needed a program to know the game's players. In amateur radio contesting, you need a calendar to know the playing field. And these are links to a number of contest calendars. Probably the best one is the WA7BNM contest calendar. And when you click on that link, it'll take you out to there. You can look at an 8-day calendar, a 5-week calendar, 12-month calendar, perpetual calendar, state QSO parties. And you can even go in and set up your own customized choices. And once you do that, every time you open it up, you'll see the contest that you're interested in. So let's take a quick look at the 8-day calendar. And you'll see it lists a number of activities. Some of these are 1-hour sprints, some are 48-hour weekends, some are major contests, some are very small contests, some are club-based challenges, some are sponsored by different national organizations or publications. So we have the CW Ops Test today on Wednesday. There's 3 of them. There's actually one last night that took place, and each of these is a 1-hour long CW contest. So if you're interested in getting on the air for 1 hour, you can complete the contest in 1 hour. And then you'll see some contests are a little bit longer. The King of Majesty, King of Spain contest is this weekend, and the big contest in the U.S. is not really a contest. It is ARRL Field Day coming up this weekend. So that's why there's not a lot of other contests going on this particular weekend. If you look a little bit further, next week we have a very important contest on July 1st. That is Canada Day. So it's a chance to work Canadian stations, but you can work anyone in that particular contest. There's also the 3830 site, which is also put together by the same person that does the Contest University site. And if you're interested in more information on W7BNM or the 3830 site, you can go to these links for more information. Some picks for newbies. I mentioned ARRL Field Day, where a lot of people in the United States get their first experience in a contest type of setting, and I know there's field days around the world with different formats, different dates, and different ways, but a lot of times these are where new hams learn about rapid contacts such as contesting. State QSO parties, State QSO Party Challenge, are sort of laid-back contest. There's also ARRL VHF and UHF, and a CQ Worldwide VHF in July. And if you're interested in these short sprint contests, there's Phone Fray on Tuesday nights, the CW Mini Ops on Wednesday, the K1 USN on Friday and Sunday, and even a RIDI contest on Thursdays for 1 hour. But if you're interested in DXing or worldwide contests, probably the biggest 2 contests out there are the CQ Worldwide DX. CW in the last 3rd weekend in November and single sideband the last weekend in October are probably the 2 biggest contests by far. But there's also a CW and digital version of the worldwide. ARRL runs a DX contest that again has single sideband CW RIDI and now a digital version in June. Worked all Europe, end of the summer, early fall. Single sideband CW and RIDI versions available. Russian DX contest in the spring. It's not just Russia, it's a worldwide contest. You can work anyone. The RSGB IOTA contest in the summertime, I think it's July or August, I can't remember off the top of my head. All Asian DX contest is in late summer, early fall, and they run multiple modes in that also. Sometimes you're just interested in working in new DX country, and Bill Sayers, AJ8B, did a real nice talk for QSO Today a couple years ago on chasing DX during a contest, and you might want to look at that video. There's also VHF UHF contest. In many ways, it's very similar to HF contesting, quick exchanges, points per contact, and multiplier. The multipliers in these typically are grid squares, so they're smaller segments, so you can easily move between multiple ones during a contest. And they involve single sideband CW and a lot of recent editions of FT8 and FT4 in VHF UHF contesting. But one of the biggest differences of VHF UHF contesting from HF contesting is the concept of QSYing. Starting out on one band, and as soon as you finish making that contact, asking the station, what other bands do you have available? and they might tell you, and then you can work through each of those additional bands by QSYing or changing frequency. So it allows you typically to start with a lower frequency band and work up to a higher frequency band. The reason why they typically do it in that order is 6 meters. The lower band has a much wider coverage than the other bands. Also, the focus of the antennas gets more narrower as the antennas get longer and higher gain on these higher frequencies. So it gives you a chance to get your antenna oriented towards other station much better. If you're interested in VHF UHF contesting or VHF UHF activities, I have a bunch of resources here, and I also did a presentation for the group, a series of 3 presentations a couple months ago on Beginner's Guide to VHF UHF in the UK. Let's talk about some myths about contesting. Potential and beginning contesters may encounter a number of myths about contesting. The first myth is it's all about the equipment. The second one is my HF radio antenna is not good and new enough for contesting. Well, let's bust those two myths. Even simpler old radios can still make contacts. It's not the equipment, it's how you use the equipment. Read the manuals, watch videos so you know how to effectively and efficiently operate all of your equipment. I would say the chances of winning a contest are much better with an old radio that you understand how to operate effectively than sitting down in front of a brand new radio and using it for the first time during that contest and having the pressure on you. Some other myths: you need an amplifier to contest, and you need a tower and beam antenna to contest. Well, contests separate competitors into separate categories based on power output. So actually by adding an amplifier, you've now put yourself into the most competitive category of them all. And it may actually mean that you're not going to finish as high as the standings as if you would be operating in another class. Typically, contests have 3 classes: a high power class of over 100 watts, typically up to 1200 watts, and a low power from about 6 to 100 watts, with most people operating around 100 watts, and then a QRP category at 5 watts or less. Each category is scored separately though. Good antennas can always help, but are not a panacea. A simple dipole can make lots of contacts. Some other additional myths: new operators cannot win contests, and there's no way to learn so much information. With so many contesting categories available, even newbies can finish first in their category or place in the top 10. There are a lot of resources for new contesters to learn more, and you don't need to know it all to get started. 2 other myths: contesting are all about the competition, and if I don't finish in the first place, there's no benefit for me in contesting. Well, many operators enter contests just to pursue other awards, that non-competitive thing we talked about earlier. Many hams operate contests with no interest in scores or competition. They're there because that is where the contacts are at, and that is where the DX is at. So what do you need to get started in contesting? A radio and an antenna. And you don't even need that if you want to do an online operation for a remote station. You can operate a remote station with just your computer and access to a remote station someone else has set up with the radio and antenna for you. You do need some basic operating skills. You need a list of available contests, but I already showed you where to find that. You need the contest rules. Well, they're there also. And you need a way to log your contacts. Although paper logs are still acceptable for some contests, computer contest logging is the preferred method for almost every contest. You need to read the rules for each contest because each specific contest has different rules. Some things are similar, but contests vary considerably. You need to know the dates and times. They're usually advertised in UTC, so make sure you're looking at the right date. Here, you don't have as much problem as we do, but when someone sees UTC 0001 Friday, they don't realize, Saturday, they don't realize it's actually Friday evening here, so they have to make sure they're on the right day. You need to know what bands and suggested frequencies are being used, who you can work, the scoring exchange and multipliers, only if you're concerned about being competitive. If you aren't, forget about this last one. You don't need to even worry about it. But you do need to know your exchange, whether you're competing or not competitive, because that is your payback for the other station making a contact with you, is that you're going to give them points. And for them to get the points, they need your exchange. So you need to know your exchange before you jump into the contest. Have your station ready. This was my setup a few years ago: 50-foot tower, 43-foot vertical, 2 end-fed slopers and worked out very well. August 2023, the tower came crashing down. That also meant I lost my slopers. It's not as competitive with a vertical as it was, but I'm still operating until we get the tower back up. Let's talk a little bit about logging. Paper logs for both general and contesting were the norm before the use of computers became common. Contests were actually one of the biggest forces in spurring the development of software for logging, because with a computer and contest logging software, you can interface it with your radio, and it makes things much more efficient and effective for operators. Here's some software out there that's the highest used software. This is from 2018 CQ Worldwide. It's actually, the percentages are even higher now for N1MM. It is a free open source software. Second most common software is a commercial software called N3FJP. Both of them will do a great job. There's other contest software out there also, and there's also software available for iOS and Linux. If you click on my link, it'll take you to my website page on contesting, and I gotta fix that link. When you go there, you'll see a section on contesting software in the page here, and you can see all that information on different contest logging software for different resources. I also have a whole presentation on logging software for both general and contesting. So how do you make a contact? Well, there's two main ways to start a contest contact. The first is calling CQ, also known as running. The other way is by answering a CQ, also known as search and pounce or hunt and pounce. Either of these ways can make you contacts. Most newcomers stick to a search and pounce because one of the problems when you're calling CQ during a big contest, you might get 15 or 20 or 30 people come back to you at the same time, and it can be a little intimidating for new operators. Also, during a really big contest, it's sometimes hard to hold a frequency to call CQ because the bands are rather crowded. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later. In a contest contact, in addition to each station's call sign, the operators also send extra information. This is called the contest exchange. The exchange provides a piece or pieces of information about the station being contacted. Different contacts use different type of exchanges. In this contact, it's a signal report and a state. So I would say 59 Ohio, and Bob out in Utah responds with 59 Utah. That's the exchange. We're done. We move on. So we've exchanged our call signs. We've done our exchange. That's the end of the contact. I mentioned different types of exchanges. Fixed exchanges can include everything from a name, an age, a state, a county, a grid square, a zone number, the year that you first licensed, etc. A serial number, on the other hand, changes with each contact you make. The first contact, you'll give the other station a 1, the second contact will be a 2, a 3, and so forth as you continue on the contest. Some contests use an exchange that lets the other person know what type of station category you're running. So for example, in field day, we tell the number of transmitters and the type or class of station we're operating. You also have combination exchanges where you have one or more of these things above here. There's also some very specialized contest exchanges. Probably the most specialized is the European DX contest that use something called the QTC. The QTC, what we actually do is we send back a log of the last 10 stations we've worked to the station we're contacting to. So we really are passing some very long traffic as composed to a 59 Ohio. Probably the second longest type of exchange is something used in the AWRL sweepstakes in November, and that is a combination, and I'll be talking about in a few moments here. Here's information on finding your grid square and other resources. So here's a typical contest contact. Station A, CQ Kilo 3, Lima Radio. Station B, Kilo 8, Zulu Tango. K8ZT 59, Tim, WPA. 59, Al, Ohio. Why is my name Al? Because Anthony's too long. I don't ever go by Tony, and I found out that people never asked me to repeat Al, and it sounds good in CW too. So you can choose any name you want for your contesting. Just make sure you use the same name throughout the same contest. But you could change names every contest if you wanted to, but I have sort of settled on Al, A-L. It's actually my initials. And he gives me a thank you, QRZ K3OR. So he's already off working another station. This is what it would sound like in phone. On CW, it's even more short because we use a lot of abbreviations. CQ test, K3LR, K8ZT, K8ZT, 5NN. We never send 599. It takes too long to send a 9. And we never send in a report other than 5NN because everyone in the contest is 5NN. So if you're contesting, please just forget about what the other station sounds like and just give them a 5NN on CW or a 59 on phone. 5NN, Ohio, TU, QRZ, K3LR. So these two contests, both the CW and phone contest, pretty quick exchange. How do you find stations? Well, you want to listen for the CQ callers. You can tune the band, which is a great way to start. But before you even do that, check the rules for suggested frequencies. Some of the smaller contests will ask the people to hang out in one specific area of frequencies to make it easier to find stations. So big contests, CQ worldwide, the entire band is filled. Smaller contests, they might say something like 25 up from the bottom of the band or something like that. So check the rules to see if there's suggested frequencies. The second thing you need to know is which stations you can contact. If I'm working the CQ worldwide, I don't get points for working US stations, so I need to work stations that are DX to me. Same thing if you're in England, you can't work English stations and so forth. So know which stations you can work. Choose the band currently supporting contacts. We didn't talk about this about bands, but first of all, contesting is usually limited to what are referred to as traditional bands: 160, 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10. Most contesting does not take place on the so-called work bands or the newer bands such as 60 meters, 30 meters, 17 meters, or 12 meters. So if you don't like contest, get on those bands during the contest weekends and have a ball. And just be glad all the contesters are off on the contesting band. So even if you're absolutely have no interest in contesting, it's a great time to get on during a contest. Just get on the bands that the contesters aren't on. Before you make your first transmission, know what the exchange is going to be. Make sure you're within your frequency and mode limits of your license, because stations may not have the same, especially when you're working DX contests, may not have the same allocation frequencies as you. You need to make sure you can copy the other station's call sign. There's nothing worse than answering a CQing station and then asking them for their call sign. Listen, they're calling CQ 30 to 40 times a minute. Make sure you know the call before you answer them. Are you on their listening frequency? And we'll talk more about that in a moment. Listen to how the other stations are responding and mimic them. There's also something called the accepted order of the elements of exchange. It sounds like it's a royal order of the odd fellows or something like that. But what we're talking about here is the order in which we give the parts of the exchange. There are a couple reasons for this. First is by tradition. Sometimes it's for clarity, and it basically comes down to that's the way we all do it. You need to do it the same way. Your best bet is often to listen to the way the contesting veterans do it and then repeat that order and style. And I'll demonstrate what I mean in a few moments here. It makes it easier for the station copying you because they know what to expect. So I mentioned that AWL sweepstakes contest. It has a long exchange. The exchange for that is a serial number followed by a category letter followed by your call sign again, followed by the last 2 digits of the year you were licensed, followed by your AWL section or DX. So right here, Tom is operating and he sends 2315, his serial number, his category B, his WB3 QFG. Year he was licensed was 2014, and he's in Western Pennsylvania. And Mary gives him a Roger, Roger, thank you, and she's off to work the next station. That's the right order. Now, here Tom sends the exact same information, but he sends it in a different order. And Mary's waiting for a number to start with, and she gets a letter. So all of a sudden, she's already thrown in this operation. So send the exchange in the way that it's expected. Some other things too, make sure you use the correct abbreviation for countries and states. On phone, use phonetics as necessary. This little chart here will help you out, especially if you're in the contest not to compete, but just to work DX stations or to work a new station. What you need to do is you need to be able to give the correct exchange, and you need to know whether they got it or not. Once you've accomplished that, you've made your contact, but you need to make sure that they got the information. How do you know when they did not get it? If they do one of the following. They send a question mark on CW. They say call, or they ask for a call on phone. They say again or repeat, or say send AGN or RPT on CW. And our question mark or number usually means they're missing a serial number. EXC means they missed the exchange, the section, the county, the state, the CQ zone, whatever they're sending, they're missing part of your exchange. Before or dupe means they think they worked you before. Check your log real quick. If you have not, send a negative or no, and then give them the information again. NIL means not in the log, means they did not work you. When do you get this? Let's say you've been trying for 5 minutes and you just never can exchange all the information. And the station is done with you and they want to move on and work someone else. They'll send an NIL on CW or say not in the log. That means they didn't work you. Go ahead and work someone else. Don't put that in your log. Now, sometimes they'll give you the benefit of the doubt and they'll say something like later or sorry. And that means try a little bit later. They don't mean 10 seconds later. They mean maybe a half an hour. Or in the case of some contests, you can even pick them up on the next day when they're not as busy if it's a 2-day contest. How do you know if they got all the information? Fortunately, a lot of stations will acknowledge your report with something like TU or Roger or thank you. QSL 73, okay, yes, or any other affirmative answer means they got all the information. Unfortunately, some stations don't take the time to do that. They'll simply go on and start calling QRZ for the next station. So we have to assume that if everything went smoothly, and after you sent your exchange, they say QRZ and start calling for next station, that they got all the information. It would be nice if they took a second to give you a TU or in Roger, but some of the stations don't do that. The big problem comes in when you're not sure if the other station has gotten the information or gotten it correctly. If the station is having a problem with your call or exchange, consider repeating it twice, but don't get carried away with endless repeating. If it's on phone, consider alternative phonetics for the missing letter. If someone busts my call as the K0 station, I'm guessing that they're getting my Zulu mixed up with a 0. So instead of going K8 Zulu Tango over and over again, I would switch to Kilo 8 Zanzibar Tango. So they're not confusing it with the 0. That also lets them know they got everything else right because I was giving everything else exactly the same way, but there was one different phonetic, and hopefully that'll get them over that hump. On phone, good operators can add a cadence and pitch to their voicing of their exchanges that clarifies different portions. On CW, proper spacing is very important. This is one of my pet peeves, and if you learn nothing else from today's talk, this is the slide you want to focus on. If a station comes back to you with your call sign and a question mark, or they ask you on phone something like K8ZT, when they ask you, don't repeat it if it's correct. Simply acknowledge that it was correct with a simple Roger, 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 QSL. Don't repeat it. If you repeat it, they're going to assume that it was wrong and you're trying to give them the right call sign. If it was wrong, send a no or negative or say negative, then repeat the corrected information, the call sign or the exchange. So if they send the call sign or exchange correctly with a question mark and it's right, acknowledge it. If it's wrong, then tell them it was wrong and then repeat it. So this is interesting. This is something that Tim N3QE did, Tim Chopa, a couple years ago for CQ Magazine. He looked at the results from a couple DX contests and compared the characters to see which characters were busted the most frequently. And you might guess that on CW, the most busted letter is H. When people hear it as an S because they don't hear all the dits, or sometimes they hear it as a 5 because they think there's another dit there. So that each of these shows you what the most commonly busted ones are. Of course, the very short ones are less likely to be busted, like an E and a T. Unfortunately, the third most busted thing is the number 8 in my call sign, and it's very problematic on CW. Here's another chart showing you which letters tend to be busted for each other on CW. He also did the same thing with phone. Well, guess what? 8 comes out even worse on phone than it does on CW, with people busting the number 8. And look what happens down here. The number 1 is almost never busted. And there's some letters that you don't even need a phonetic for because the letter is so distinct. So for example, an L or an R sound very distinct. even a lima or a radio sound very distinct, whereas some letters just are very difficult, both phonetically or as the letter itself. Now, we already talked about the accepted order of exchange. Let's talk about another thing, and that is cut numbers and unintentional cut numbers, basically mistakes. These are something that happen on CW only. So instead of sending a 599, which takes a little bit longer, they send a 5NN. And a lot of stations are now not sending 5NN, they're sending ENN. So the cut number for 5 is an E, the cut number for a 9 is an N. Why would you possibly do this? Well, it's a lot faster to do this on CW in a contest, so they're looking for fastness. There are common cut numbers for almost every letter. I'm sorry, there's cut letters for every number. But the ones that are used most frequently are the T for a 0, the N for a 9, and the A for a 1. Those are probably the 3 most common. 5s are starting to be sent as E's. That's becoming more common. It's not a cut number, but a K is used for 1,000. ATT would represent 100. And a lot of times what people will do with a serial number, especially when they're starting out, they'll prefix it with zeros to let you know that you copied the whole thing. Especially, let's say it's the second day of the contest and everyone's sending numbers that are 3 digits long and I'm just starting the contest. So when I send 12 to someone, they're going to think they missed part of it. So I might send T12 or 012. T is much quicker, and that lets them know that I'm still do have a small number in the contest. Now, these unintentional cut numbers tend to happen when people send sloppy CW, or they have equipment issues that are causing them to be cut off. So if you're trying to send a 5 and one character gets cut off either at the beginning or the end, you might confuse it for an H. The problem is the character that's getting cut off might be a dit or it might be a da. So there's actually other possibilities. So just when we hear 4 dits, we can't assume that it's always a 5. But quite often, if you're expecting a number and it's sent sloppily, that's what it is. The other common one is to send a J instead of a 2 by dropping one of the dits, and that can be problematic. I'm sorry, one of the DAWs can be problematic also. So here's the minimum. The calling stations should give their call sign frequently enough that stations will recognize them. They should give the complete call sign of the station they're replying to or ask for a repeat, give their exchange, acknowledge the reception or exchange and ask for repeat, and then log the contact. You as the answering station, you need to tune on to the station's listening frequency. If they're listening a little bit higher or lower, I'm not talking about split like we do with DX. I'm talking about just fractions of a kilohertz difference. You want to be on the place that they're listening, not the place they're calling. Give your call sign phonetically on phone. Answer only when called, correcting any problems with the call sign. Know and give the exchange, and log the contact. That is the contract of contesting. Both groups carry out all their required things. Things go nice and smoothly. What's next after your first contact? Continue to make additional contacts. Some contacts act as multipliers, also known as mults. The number of points you get from a sum of your contacts is multiplied by the sum of multipliers to give the final score. What are multipliers? Different contests have different types of multipliers. They might be different states, different counties, different countries, or some even have 2. So the CQ Worldwide uses the country and the CQ zone. So you can have the potential of getting 2 multipliers when you work a new country. Some tips for newer contesters: make sure you read and understand the contest rules, know your exchange, know the CQing station's call sign before responding, keep your QSO streamlined, send only what is required in the exchange, avoid of excessive information, repeat only requested information. There's no reason to repeat double all of your exchanges. For tips on successfully making contacts, I have a whole presentation called How to Make That QSO, Get in the Rhythm, Know the Rhyme, and Dance the Dance. It talks about timing, exchanges, and mimicking other stations. So when you're done with the contest, if you're interested in competing, and again, if you're not interested in competing, you don't need to do this part. But if you are, I would suggest you enter a submission. Contests either require or greatly prefer electronic submission of logs. Most are submitted by an online file uploader or via an email attachment. And for details and deadlines, see each contest rules. The most common way to upload them is something called a Cabrillo file. It has information on the logging, on the call side of the station, categories, etc. And then it has all the exchanges, all the QSOs and their exchanges with them. This format is called Cabrillo, and if you're interested in more information, you can click on this link. Some contests have a tool to create the Cabrillo files, but most logging software creates them for you. Each Cabrillo file is unique to a specific contest, so it's not like ADIF where you can export your logs and import them into any program. Cabrillo files have to be designed for that specific contest so they can look for the right multipliers and scoring formats. If you need help with it, you can go out to this site where there's a number of Cabrillo file generators. You can use an ADIF file. You can even use a typed spreadsheet or text file to convert it into a Cabrillo file. And most of the major contests are listed here. So if you click on this, it will let you generate the information you need for that Cabrillo file and then upload your information. So I have a suggested post-contest routine. I generate my Cabrillo file for sending in my entry. I also export the contest from my contesting software as an ADIF file so I can import it into my comprehensive logging software. Trying to use your contest log N1MM or N3FJP as your main log is fraught with problems. And I talk about that a lot in my logging presentation if you want to take a look at that later. So once I export as an ADIF, I can import into almost any logging program. I also enter my information at 3830. 3830 is known as the contest rumor site. Basically, you put in your information and you can see how other stations did the compare yourself with them. So if you look at any of these, you can go in and see how individual stations finished in each of the categories. Now, this is not everyone, because everyone doesn't submit their score to 3830, and none of these logs have been checked for duplications or other problems with them. So this is a suggested rumor score, but it gives you a good idea of how you finished without having to wait for the results to come out weeks later. There's also some contests that use 3830 as the sole entry form. So if you want to enter the CW ops, you don't need to send in a Cabrillo file. You just go to after the contest to the 3830 site and put in your information for that day's contest. Same thing with the State QSO Party Challenge. It works from the 3830 site. I also upload my logs for QSLing purposes, the Logbook of the World and EQSL. I also upload my log to ClubLog to allow stations to do online QSL requests. I back up all my logging software files to an online storage. I use Google Drive, but you can use OneDrive or Dropbox or any of those to keep copies off-site. Now, the results. Typically, there's a multi-month delay before contest results are released. This may be published in magazines, newsletters, or on websites. Some contests notify participants of the results via email, but not all of them do. There is, though, real-time logs that you can look at. Again, not everyone does it, but if people choose to do it, it's very interesting to see how you're doing during the contest. And there's a number of these. You can click on them for more information on each of these different ones. And let's see, for some reason that link is not working. So you can go in here and you can see how people are doing in this particular contest real time if they choose to. And it's really easy to have your information uploaded in N3MM, in N1MM. You just simply click a little button and it will automatically upload your information without you even knowing this taking place. And it does it every few seconds or every few minutes depending on how you have it set up. Here's some examples of some online scoreboard results. I mentioned 3830. If you want to find out more information, take a look at this link here. Or you can see this slideshow that I put together on 3830 itself. Now, unfortunately, winning even the largest contest doesn't result in big money awards. So if you got into this for the money, it's a money losing operation. people spend thousands and thousands of dollars developing contesting stations, and they end up with a simple wooden plaque or a paper certificate. So if you did this for the money, unfortunately you listened to this whole presentation, you're going to be very disappointed. Most of the time it's a certificate, and you'll see that this particular year I finished first in the world. That's the only time I've ever done first in the world. I've gotten first in the US a couple times in the CQ Worldwide, but it wasn't my best score. It wasn't even close to my best score. One of the things about winning a contest depends on your performance plus who else had good performance and who else entered the contest that year. So I have a little slide here. Hopefully I think it's in this slideshow. It shows how many times I submitted scores to the CQ Worldwide, and by far this was not even close to my best score. It was about half of my best score, but this is the score that won because it was the best score that year with those people that were competing. This is a course I did for the ARRL. It's a 5-module course on contesting introduction. You do need to be a member to take the course though. Also, you can watch my my busting contesting myths. This is a video that you can watch. Unfortunately, it's not extremely, wait, this is the slideshow, or is this the video? This is the slideshow. There's also a video available of it, and you can go through and see all these myths. Let me go through this real quick to show you one thing. Okay, this just shows you the times I entered the CQ Worldwide and how I finished. You can see that I finished first in the US a number of times, first in North America a number of times, but I've only finished first in the world one time. And it's not even close. It's my 11th best score. So I've had 10 scores better than the one that actually won the world championship, that didn't win the world championship. That's also available as a video. If you search on YouTube, you can watch the video. That I'll try and put the link in here too. If you're interested in contesting software really benefits from being interfaced to the radio, so you don't have to put in the frequency or anything like that. And I have a whole presentation on radio to computer interfacing for both logging purposes and also for the purposes of sending exchanges via CW or even phone. Some beginner resources, some RSGB and UK resources on contesting. Some more resources, so there's lots of reading for you to do during the summer. If you ever get a chance to attend Contest University the Thursday before Dayton Hamvention, it's a great opportunity, but the nice thing is, even if you can't get there, they have a file section on their website that has all of the slideshows from previous years. So for example, if you want to see my slideshow on busting contest myths, you can do it right there. If you want to see my slideshow on low power contesting and QRP contesting, you can do it right there. Also, about 1/4 of the slideshows, the presentations are recorded as videos. They don't record all the rooms simultaneously. So you can go in and watch 1/4 of the presentations by going to these links. So you can actually see what the presenters were like, and you can jump through each of the ones.
That's basically what I was just saying there. So when
kids coming and everything, school clubs are a really great way to get kids interested in amateur radio and contesting. My school club,
and I'm really glad that I did that particular slide, because that is one thing about contesting. Contesting is a really great idea for youth. Most of us think that they're not interested in contesting because they're just starting out. No, they're very interested in contesting, and they're very used to competitiveness in team sports, individual sports. So contesting can be a great way to get kids involved in amateur radio. If you're interested, you might want to join a contesting club. There's a number of them around the world. Find one that's in your area and join it. Also, my website has more contesting resources on it. And that's the end. So I'll take questions. But again, the link to get to this slideshow is tiny.cc/AR. I'm sorry, tiny.cc/AR contest. You can shoot that QR code. I'll bring that back up in 1 second. I just want to mention the last slide is a link to all of my presentations. You can go through and see a number of different presentations or slideshows, and if someone's recorded it, I tend to have a recording available on it. So for example, if you want to go to my myth busting you can go to that and you can see the video of that. So I'll put that back there, and I will be happy to take questions, comments, etc.
Brilliant, lovely. Thank you very much, Anthony. As always, really thorough description of contesting and its opportunities and the fun you can have with it. So thank you very much. Should we just chuck it open now? Who wants to ask a question, make a comment? Please do. Please do shout. Yes, go ahead, Keith.
Yes, good evening. Good talk, Anthony. Very much appreciated. Learned a few things in there for sure. The thing I was going to say, I use N1MM for RTTY contesting, as does Jim, and logbook of the HRD Ham Radio Deluxe is my main log, and I can actually transfer the contact straight away into that log rather than creating the ADI file, which I find much more useful.
Yes, but the main thing that you're doing is the right thing that I suggest to everyone, and that's not to just try and keep your logs in a contesting software. And let me explain that real quick, because that's always something that comes up. N1MM, if you've never used it before, creates a new file for each contest you work. So if you work 30 or 40 contests a year and you've been doing it for 10 years, there's 300 log files. And if someone contacts you and wants a QSL and you're trying to find that, it can be very difficult to find a contact. But instead, as Keith is doing by uploading it to other software, it's very easy to find it just by going to his HDR, whatever software you're using, do a quick search, and you can bring it right up. So take a look again at that logging software program I talked about, because I talk about the whole idea of a comprehensive logbook in there.
Yeah, the only thing that I did find, and hopefully in the new version of HRD when it comes out should solve it, is occasionally you do not get your serial number input. It inputs a 0 all the time. So that's the only disadvantage, but at least you have the call sign in the log.
Yes.
Yeah, Keith, that's a very good point, and Anthony is quite right. And I know that's one of the reasons you said it in your presentation, Anthony, but if you want to enter contests, but you also want to log, new countries, new entities, new islands on the air, and so on, then you must put it into your main logbook, and you've got that reference then for submitting to logbook of the world, or linking to OQRS to request a QSL card if you want one, and it's important then to do it in that way. Right, who else wants to go? Any questions, comments? Sometimes, yeah, go on, Roger.
Hi, Anthony. Thanks. Good to see you again. I wondered, for people who don't enter the contest competitively, how important is it to load a log? Because I've never done that. I've given points away, sort of thing, in the spirit of giving a few points. But
that's a great question. I forgot the answer. The answer is, don't worry about it. 99.9% of the contest, the person will not get dinged for a contact that doesn't show up in a log, because you won't show up in other people's log either. Now, if you're showing up in 400 logs and you're not submitting your score, what will happen is the contest organizer will typically send you an email saying, can you submit a log? We see that you're in a bunch of logs. But no, if you're a casual operator and just want to make a few contacts, give someone a few points, work in your country, don't worry about submitting the log. It's totally optional. But let me warn you about something. I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico for a Sunday for a meeting that was starting on Monday, and I had the afternoon to kill. It was the AWRL VHF contest. I had my 817 and the rubber duck antenna that works on 6 meters. I made about 24 contacts all over the Midwest using the balconies and downspouts of the 3-story hotel. and sent my report in, and I got first place QRP category in the New Mexico section. So the biggest problem you got to worry about is if you only make a few contacts and you happen to be in a category that doesn't have a lot of competitors, you might have missed the chance at an award.
Thank you.
Yes, Anthony, I was going to say I've got one award on the shack here from first place single op CW operator in the UK QRP section of the RSGB 2128 megahertz contest in 2013. So I was very pleased with that. But when you actually look at how many entries there were in the QRP section operating CW, it was something like 25 stations. So you know the chances that you've kind of got near the top is pretty high. So that's on my wall here, and I can say I've actually had first place in one of the contests, but for exactly that reason.
Let me show you. Let me show an example of exactly that. If you go to the ARRL website and go to the field day site, you can see the field day results from previous years, and there's a number of there's a large number of categories in this particular thing. Let's see. I didn't go the right way. Let me get in the right way to find it here. Results. So if you go back and look at the results from 2023, oops, I want the line scores. 2023 line scores, you'll see that K8ZT okay, why am I not showing up? I got the wrong one. Well, the category that I enter had three different operators in it. So I enter a category called 2 Bravo, 1 Bravo. It means 2 radios on the air at the same time with 1 operator battery powered. Most people don't operate 2 radios. I'll be operating on FT8 and FT4, and I will also be operating on CW and single sideband, but not single sideband CW at the same time. It'll always be FT8 and FT4, and I can show you a picture of that real quick here. This is the setup I'll be running. So this is exactly the table I'll be using. These are the radios I'll be using. Here's my one KX3 in the box here. The other one's sitting next to the box. This computer over here and this radio is going to be operating CW or phone depending on which I'm on. But the whole time I'll also be running FT8 and FT4 over here. So if you get a chance to get on the bands this weekend, I will be in West Virginia giving out a POTA, but I won't say anything about it because I'm too busy operating field day, but it'll also be a POTA operation for Babcock State Park in West Virginia. So that's an example of picking a category that not many people are in means that you're going to win. You're going to be more likely to win your category.
The other thing is, and you mentioned it, you gave some US examples, Anthony, of contests which are slightly more relaxed than others. So you know, if we look at the big contests like CQWW, for example, both on CW and sideband, they're completely and utterly mental, aren't they? They cover the bands in massive signals, massive stations, for hours and hours and hours. But I find, interestingly, here in the UK, the RSGB contest, for example, the club contest that runs on 80 meters CW and sideband, but the CW one in particular, there's virtually no one sending CW above 20 words a minute. So if you are, new to CW or you are new to operating and you want to enter a contest, that's a wonderful one to go and operate. And on the sideband version, it's run very, very low key indeed. And the same applies that I think there's 1 or 2 people in the room who've put entries into the RSGB affiliated clubs contest on VHF, UHF that they run. And again, I find them very, very relaxed indeed. People are very laid back. They'll even stop for a chat with people that they know. Even the big stations will do that. So a big station on an evening of operating over, I can't remember how many hours it is. Andy, you can remind me, 2-3 hours on the VHF affiliated clubs contest. But even the big stations, I maybe only working 200 stations over 3 hours or something. It's not massive numbers of people, so it's very relaxed. And so if you're looking to, on VHF for example, work into different squares that you've not worked or heard before, or hear a lot of single sideband activity or a lot of CW activity, those are very good to go and find it, because otherwise VHF in particular can be very quiet indeed.
Yes, and coming up in just a couple, I think it's 2 weeks, is the CQ VHF contest. So it's a worldwide contest. Not really big contest, but it's a good opportunity. Also, take a look at some of the national contests, some of the things like the Switzerland has the cantons contest. I know a couple different other countries. I enjoy the one of the contests I really enjoy, and they have both a CW version and a phone version in the fall, is the SAC, the Scandinavian Activity Contest. All the Scandinavian countries. So again, you're limited to who you can work. You can't just work anyone. You have to work the stations on that list. But it's a great opportunity to work places like JX and JW, OX. Some of the stations that are not on all the time, the Faroes. So it's a good opportunity to work stations, and it's not a real busy contest. There might be really busy contesting stations, but they're not working as many stations as they would during the CQ Worldwide.
Yeah, a similar one for us in the UK is the RSGB Commonwealth contest, which of course, and I saw your picture from the ARRL. It made me smile because I've seen similar pictures of the old RSGB. It was called the British Empire Radio Union contest in the great days of the British Empire, and as it then existed. Now it's the Commonwealth contest, but the only stations that count for contacts are within the Commonwealth, and that means for us in the UK, that's obviously, we've got Canada, but we've also got Australia, we've got New Zealand. We've got some places that we don't hear an awful lot of on HF a lot of time. So it's great to work some of those countries that otherwise you would struggle with in CQWW or WPX with a simple low power station, with a dipole or an end-fed half wave or something. You would struggle to make the contacts, which you might not in something like those particularly geographically confined contests.
Yes, and that's one of the most frustrating contests because I hear all the good DX and I can't work any of it. There's two contests that drive me crazy: the Commonwealth contest and the FOC CW operators contest, because they're both closed contests, so I can't participate in any of those. So that means I'm always hearing you stronger and the really great stations, and they're calling CQ, and I'm saying I wish I was in the UK so I could call them, but I can't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but they're the ones that give us pleasure. The one that I won in 2013 was the 28 megahertz contest, and that one they've abandoned that now. But you used to be sought out based on your postcode. So our postcodes in the UK start with 2 letters. So the first 2 letters of your postcode was what you had to send as the information required for the contest. And of course, there are some places where there aren't an awful lot of radio amateurs in some postal code areas, so they were very sought after by other people trying to get contacts in that contest. They knew that was giving them a multiplier that would help them considerably to win the contest. But so sadly they've done away with the requirement for the postcode.
There's also a couple contests that are single band contests, so it's a great opportunity to work some of the bands that don't get as much contesting activity. There's a couple 160 contests, the Stu Perry contest, the ARRL, and the CQ contest, and that's one of the few single sideband 160 contests. So a great chance to get on 160 and work. And again, don't worry if you don't have much of a signal. There's great receiving stations out there for those. But on the opposite end, there's a 10-meter contest, And for about about 8 out of every 11 years, 10 meters is marginal, but it's remarkable how on that particular weekend in December, all of a sudden it seems like 10 is open, at least trans-equatorial 10-meter operations. So take advantage of some contests like that if you're interested in trying out new bands or getting some new countries on certain bands. So there's some other things like that available contest-wise. Take a look at the contest calendar, and again, pick what you're interested in. Pick the mode you're interested in, the time of day, the amount of time in the contest, and give one of them a try, and see how it works. By the way, if you're a little intimidated by the logging software, a great way to learn the logging software is get it all set up, interfaced with your radio, everything ready to go. Get on during a contest and never transmit. Find a strong station that's calling CQ and pretend you're there and log for them for about an hour. And it's remarkable how fast you'll pick up using the logging software, and there's no pressure about working about making contacts or getting the other station right, because you're sitting there listening and just pretending you're logging for that station.
Yeah, that's a super idea. Yeah, very good. Anyone else with a question or comment to Anthony? But just the other thing that I don't think you mentioned this, Anthony, but you know, if you're doing it for non-competitive reasons, you're doing it to find new countries, new entities, and so on. You'll find it's better later on in the contest. So it's better. It's worse at the two ends. So the beginning of the contest, it's very frantic. The end of the contest, it's quite frantic as well. But a bit before the end of the contest, maybe if it's over 2 days, the second day, in the middle of the second day, it's gone a little bit quieter. And if you haven't been around a long time, you're suddenly a completely new call sign, and therefore you'll make those contacts because you're not crowded out with 100 stations calling that rare station at the same time.
When I first started out, I got in the habit for 2-day contests. If there was a country I couldn't work, I'd write down the time and frequency that I heard them on the first day, and I would go back and listen for them on the second day in the same approximate area. And it was remarkable how often they were back there and they were not as busy. So when you hear a station or a country that you want to work, write down the time and frequency and then check them either later that same day or check the next day. And it's remarkable how super competition goes away and you catch them when there's no one trying to compete against you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, I think you can go into these things at different levels, can't you? That's what you're really saying to people in your presentation tonight. You can go into it single-mindedly to get the highest score you can possibly achieve, and set a target the following year. You're going to do even better than that because you've done X, Y, and Z to improve your station or your operating style or whatever it might be. Or you're going to operate longer hours in the contest over the period it's on, those sorts of things. But you know, you don't. That's only one way of doing it. There's a million other ways of taking advantage of it.
As you start getting better, if you really want to improve your scores, one of the things I suggest for the big contest, the 2-day contest, take a look at your logs and plan what you're going to operate this year based on what you've done in the past. What I mean by that is, for example, when I was getting to that point where I was starting to be competitive, I would make a list of all the European stations I worked, so I knew that if I heard them, I would expect to work them. But I also made a list of the ones that were only on one time. So if I would hear a station that was only on one time, I might spend a little bit more time trying to get them, as opposed to a country I knew I would get 5 or 10 of during that contest. Plan based on the propagation when you're going to switch bands. Now, maybe you'll switch bands and you didn't have the time exactly right, but that at least means that you remember to go look at that band. So I knew that, for example, during the years when the sunspot cycle was low, about 2 to 3 p.m. in the evening on Saturday and Sunday both, I would swing the antenna south, get on 10 meters, and often make a number of contacts. Maybe only 10, but they're all double multipliers because they were all new countries, all new zones, and I only spent half an hour or an hour there. That's something I would have totally missed if I hadn't made a note of myself to make sure that at that time I went down and looked at that band.
Yeah, all good fun. I mean, we've got a number of people in the room here I know who've come into the hobby fairly new and discovered contesting and enjoy it and enjoyed the excitement of trying to improve their scores by when they make entries in the contests, and that's great. And I think it's another example, Anthony, and you've said that as well as some of us here as well, that the hobby that we're enjoying is so massive, isn't it? It's so enormous in so many different categories and modes and frequencies of operation, that we can all go and find something that we enjoy, but sometimes we can dabble in things that perhaps we wouldn't normally do, but can get pleasure from it. And I think that's what you've hopefully given people one or two ideas about in your presentation tonight. So before Anthony disappears, have we got anyone else with a question, comment to Anthony they want to put to him?
Yeah, I always win the Hams in My Street contest because I'm the only one. But a serious question is, how do you deal with the guy who keeps on calling K8ZT? No call signs, no nothing, K8ZT, and then he might or might not get somebody else reply to him, who of course does give a call sign.
Yeah, it's problematic, and that's again where software can help you. Like with N1MM, once you put that station in the band map, you'll know when you come back to that same spot. So what I'll do is I'll put them in a memory and pop back and forth. I won't sit there and wait for them forever. But it is extremely frustrating. And you know what? If you look at the results after, those are not the people that win the contest. They usually have a pretty good score, but they're not the top winners because they're giving up a lot of contacts by never identifying themselves. When you listen to some stations, it is remarkably smooth. They can give their call sign almost every time. They can thank the other person and give them a Roger, and they move just as fast as the station who's not giving their call sign. They move just as fast as the station that's not acknowledging people, and they have less mistakes and less errors. So it's not necessarily being fast, it's being efficient and doing it at a rapid pace.
Yeah, so when we suffer, Henry, we suffer with the same problem with some stations operating, de-expedition sometimes. But most of the de-expeditions are very good, but we do end up with a few operators of some of those stations making contacts and never giving their call sign for, dozens and dozens of contacts. And, yes, I know you can go and have a look at, the cluster and discover who's on that frequency and you're assuming it's that person. But that's very frustrating, and you're quite right. I don't think those people operating in that way end up making more contacts than other people would, because people are attracted to stay there and listen and call again when they hear where the call sign is and where the station is coming from. You're more likely to stay and work your way through that pile-up than otherwise.
Yes.
So yeah, Henry, I think that's bad operating, isn't it? And that exists. Like we've got bad drivers in the world and bad cyclists and bad pedestrians and so on. We've got bad radio operators as well. But being a beginner is not being a bad operator. Being a beginner is you've started and you're wanting to learn. On the just to say to you, Anthony, on the YouTube chat for people watching it live, Andy 2E0REE has just posted up the message, as they always say, listen, listen, listen. And that's absolutely right. Right, anyone else with any final comments or questions to Anthony? If not, Anthony, can I thank you very much indeed? And can we show appreciation to Anthony in the normal way, guys, everyone? Thank you very much. Very enjoyable.
It was my pleasure as usual. I love doing presentations for you guys, and hopefully you'll have me back again for something else in the future. Again, if you get a chance to get on this weekend, I know I know that from your end of the world, it seems like it's a lost weekend, but there is some stations that you can work on the higher bands on field day, and some people will even want to work you. So think about maybe jumping on for a little while this weekend and get a chance to operate a little bit. Hope to work you all on HF in the future, and 73 everyone.
Yeah, 7-3s, Anthony. Thanks very much for coming along. And good night to our viewers on YouTube as well.